Okay, so I'm going to present my unit plan overview for this class. A quick summary about it. It is a social studies unit plan for fifth graders. The whole unit focuses on American Revolution with the target question of how did specific events, decisions influence both sides of the war. So throughout the unit, the students will be learning about both sides that fought in the war. They will learn about the leaders and on both sides, and also the women's role in the American Revolution, and we will touch on slavery a little bit in the unit as well. The standards that I am focusing on is students plan to employ research strategies to locate information and other resources for their intellectual and creative pursuits. I chose this because in this unit, there's a few lessons where I ask my students to access technology, visuals, or other resources that they can get their hands on to further their knowledge. So I thought that this standard really spoke to that in my vision for how I wanted my students to be creative in their learning process. And the other standard is explain the relationship or interactions between two or more individuals, events, ideas, or concepts in historical, scientific, or technical text based on specific information in the text. I chose this because going back to my target question on how did specific events, decisions influence both sides, I think that this standard right here targets how I want my students to explain the interactions between two or more individuals or events, like I'm talking about in history. So I think this one really helps lay out what my unit plan target is. And the other objectives describe the advantages and disadvantages of each side during the American Revolution with respect to military leadership, geography, types of resources, and incentives. Also, generate questions about individuals and groups who have shaped significant historical changes, and continue with these. So I chose both of these because in my unit, there's a couple lessons where I'm asking my students, and also in the assessments, I'm asking my students to describe the advantages of disadvantages in a specific part of the American Revolution, whether it be the military, whether it be advantages, disadvantages towards the women or the leaders, the type of weapons, resources that both sides have used. And the last objective I chose for was because I want my students to be asking questions about what we're learning. And so that's something that I will be assessing them on so I can check their understanding and check their engagement throughout the unit. My formative assessment, I will conduct halfway through our unit plan, or my unit plan, after we've discussed vocabulary, certain leaders and their roles and their influence on both sides, and disadvantages. I will be using Kahoot to assess them, which I have linked down here. And these standards are going to help me assess this Kahoot. In the Kahoot, there are 6 questions, I believe. One of them is just kind of about stating their opinions, answering a multiple choice or true or false about the advantages or disadvantages, and describing certain leaders or their role in this assessment. So that's why I chose these objectives, because that kind of helps me just assess and be aware of what the target is for my students in this assessment. And for my final assessment, I am going to have my students write a letter to one of the leaders that we learned about. That could be George Washington or one of the British leaders, one particular influencer we had learned about or had they discovered on their own. There's going to be specific questions that I want them to focus on in this letter, or specific topics to discuss with their leader, and based off of who they would like to pick to write to, they can choose one of the 3 or 4 questions or main focuses of the letter to make the letter flow a little bit better to whoever they're writing to. And this will just kind of help me wrap up the unit and assess how much they've comprehended and retained, and who kind of stood out to them. And this could also help me prepare for the following year. Just looking back at who my students write to, it will show me what types of leaders or what parts in the unit stood out to them regarding the types of people that we discussed. Or if there is a person or a leader that wasn't written to, that shows me that I need to make that a little bit more interesting or touch on that topic a little bit more in my unit. Lastly, my accommodations and modifications that I am going to be aware of throughout my unit plan. One of them being extended time. I think with a unit plan that can cause some issues just anytime, but I really want to make sure I'm giving my students the time to process and comprehend all of the information that I'm teaching them so they can walk away understanding and enjoy what they're learning. So that's really important to me. I want to make sure I give them extended time if needed on assignments, but especially assessments. I know tests can be very stressful, especially in social studies. There's a lot of names or dates to remember, so I want to make sure I'm giving my students the most time that they need to be successful. Providing additional notes to some of my students could also be helpful to them in understanding certain topics that we discuss. Providing visuals is very key to help them make connections to specific leaders, individuals, times, events that happened throughout the Revolutionary War. All right, and that is it. So there we go.